Greetings, folks, and welcome to today's show. My original intention was to have Pat Welch, who is the chairman of the Tullahoma School Board, on, and he's agreed to do that, but then he became a little under the weather shortly before we were scheduled, and so we'll delay him and have him on a little bit later. But I did want to start talking about school issues, and I've invited Dr. Dan Lawson, who graciously stepped up, and so he's here with us. And thanks, Dan, for agreeing to be with us.
You're always good.
You're always very, very cooperative. There's a kind of a hot button issue that maybe we could dispense with in the beginning, and then move on to talk about some of the substantive stuff, and that is security.
Right.
With all the attention that's been going on in the last 2 months, what's happening in Tullahoma?
Yeah, we had a dreadful incident in Newtown, Connecticut. Had a young man who was mentally ill and mentally challenged, and responded very poorly based on the fact that he had ready access to some weapons, made a response, and just did a heinous, dreadful act in that elementary school in Sandy Hook. Our challenge, though, is a challenge of perspective as we think about our kids in school today, and I'm saying our not as a philosophical statement, but as a very real statement for me. When I think about my son at Tullahoma High School today, I have to consider the fact that schools have been and continue to be among the safest places for students to be. Chief Paul Blackwell and I went to a meeting last week in Nashville focusing on school security. And one of the things that really resonated with me more than anything was the fact that in 2008, we had about 1,700 homicides involving children between the age of 5 and 18. That's 1,700 nationwide in that age bracket, and about 17 of those took place in schools. That tells me from a big picture perspective, schools have been and continue to be very safe. Does that say that they're as safe as they should be, or as safe as we should endeavor to make them? Not at all. That's why the chief and I are working on things. We met with our administrative leadership team last week, and in fact, the mayor and Jody Baltz have asked if they could join us next week. We're focusing on any number of ideas to improve school security, improve school safety, and we would invite folks in the community to also assist in that endeavor. Keep folks away from things that are dangerous, whether they be drugs, whether they be weapons, but especially folks who are having some mental, emotional challenges. Make sure that we don't put those tools of danger in their hands. And that's coming from a guy who loves to shoot and loves to hunt. But those are tools that provide for me entertainment, pleasure, but provide a lot of heartbreak and dismay when they're in the wrong hands. So schools are safe places. Schools are safe places that we should look at making safer, and that's exactly what we're working on.
Well, and you would think from the amount of energy that the media devoted to the Newtown thing, you'd really think that that's a major problem across the country, more than anything else. And as you indicated, that's not the case. And the one that really gets my attention is the possibility of arming teachers to go into the classroom armed. Well, those are very difficult subjects, and it's good. Your perspective is very good. The schools are safe. We shouldn't go jump off the cliff. Well, with that, folks, let's take a short commercial break, and we'll talk about some school things.
The highest standard of trust offers a sense of safety and comfort. It's established over time. You know when you see it. You know when you feel it. There's a standard of trust in healthcare. It's the Joint Commission Gold Seal of Approval. In 2003, Life Care Center of Tullahoma voluntarily achieved this accreditation and maintains it still today. Life Care, meeting a higher standard because residents matter most.
Let the Smokehouse be your mountain getaway destination in beautiful Monteagle, Tennessee. Enjoy our cabins, restaurant, and old general store. Shop thesmokehouse.com featuring homemade barbecue sauces, jellies, and many other fine Tennessee products. Our live Music on the Mountain series features some of the best local and Nashville talent every Friday and Saturday night, 6:30 p.m. No cover, kids welcome.
We're talking today, folks, with Dr. Dan Lawson, who is the superintendent of, by the way, one day you're addressed as a director and the next day as superintendent. Which is your title?
Both are very polite terms, and those are preferable to what I'm called by many. But statute in the state of Tennessee allows for a person to be called either. So superintendent or director of schools are both appropriate, both correct. I typically call myself a superintendent because in most other states, the chief executive officer is a superintendent. Tennessee, I think, is the only one that calls themselves directors of schools. So for my sake, when I'm talking to people in other states, it's easier to just call myself a superintendent than explain the background.
Okay. At any rate, we want to talk about a couple of things that are issued. My first item, which got my attention with an article in the Tennessean recently, that indicated that we are accepting that our schools, our teacher colleges, teacher programs, are accepting students with an ACT as low as 15. Apparently that's not uncommon. In one case, I think, is down as low as 12 on the ACT. The ACT, the top score is 36, as I recall, and we're considered, you got to be in the low 20s to be sort of in the acceptable category. So that struck me as very strange, and they seem to have satisfied themselves, this is SCORE speaking, that there is a correlation between the ACT level and the effectiveness of the teacher at the end product.
Right.
What's your reaction to that?
Let me just give you a little background as to what the ACT is and what's out there. We will have students at Tullahoma High School today starting to prepare for, and in fact some will take the ACT as sophomores in high school. Our typical, and for a frame of reference, this is probably important to know, our average graduate last year had an ACT of greater than 21. So when you start thinking about some schools of education accepting an education prospective graduate with a 12, that certainly raises a red flag at first blush, and it certainly raises a red flag for me, because when I think about my average high school graduate having an ACT of 21, that doesn't tell me everything I need to know about that kid, but it does tell me a lot about the academic preparation that they have had and they have enjoyed. And it also tells me that some of their basic skills associated with testing have been met. They understand the testing process, they can work in the testing process, or they will retake. It's not atypical at all for us to have students who take their tests several times until they get the score they want. Now, honestly, most of those students who take several times are doing so to become more competitive for scholarship monies. So I certainly understand the issue of ACT is out there. Is a 12 too low? I would suggest that 12 is an anomaly. I certainly hope it's an anomaly. It, however, is not the only cut that happens. ACT is given in the high school, then the student goes to college, but before a student leaves college and goes to a collegiate placement, they take a series of tests that are called the praxis. Those praxis exams, P-R-A-X-I-S, praxis exams, those praxis exams are administered both in general areas and then in areas associated specifically with whatever the student will be teaching.
Are they tough enough?
The cut scores are out there that truly measure knowledge that students have in content area. I would suggest that we've got some folks in our community, folks in several communities, who have gone through teacher ed programs and have not met that threshold for praxis, therefore don't qualify for that teaching position. So while at first blush when you read score, you almost have the impression that if they get in the program, they're automatically out in teaching. That's not the case. They will have met another threshold before they become a teacher.
Well, that's Tennessee.
That's the state of Tennessee.
Is that a general practice across the country?
Praxis is probably given to the majority of teachers in the states, yes, sir. There are exceptions, but in the majority of states, there will be, praxis has taken place of what used to be called the NTE, or the National Teachers Exam. So it is that threshold that folks have to meet before they go on. The advantage of that is a young man, young woman who is finishing their collegiate career is probably going to be a whole lot more attentive to the test requirements, attentive to preparation. So they may have had a low ACT score to get into college when they didn't have the same motivation, but as they exit, have a pretty decent praxis score, at least one that meets the threshold and allows them to go on.
Well, in addition to licensing, and we've talked about this before, the top 2 or 3 school systems recognized as the top 2 or 3 in the world have 2 or 3 things in common, one of which is that they insist that their teachers be in the top academic levels of the schools where they're graduating. In addition to praxis, do we look at the academic level of the people we're considering?
We certainly do. The ACT is a big part, or excuse me, the GPA that they have in their collegiate program of studies is a big part of the evaluation that we do as we look at our teachers' readiness and ability to transition into our classrooms. So candidly, we're going to have a candidate with a 3.5 GPA versus a candidate with a 2.5 GPA. We're going to believe and assume that there's a relationship between their content knowledge, and that person with the higher GPA is more likely to have retained more of that content knowledge. Certainly, that's not the only tool. We're going to dialogue. We're going to make sure that the relationships are there. We're going to make sure that the disposition to be a teacher is there. But certainly, it's of value to have expectations of rigor, not only for the students that we teach, but for the teachers that we employ, just to see how they did as teachers. Now, you hit on something that I think is very important, though. As we look at Singapore, as we look at Hong Kong, as we look at Finland, a lot of nations that historically will lead international studies on the qualities of education, there are a couple of commonalities that are critically important. First and foremost, those students aren't thinking about a 12 on their ACT. Students in each of those 3 enterprises are among the best and the brightest that are available to them. They're among the best and the brightest because they are very highly respected. They are held in tremendous regard by their community, in tremendous esteem by their culture, and comparatively speaking, they're well compensated. So those 2 things have made some of the other cultures quite different in the recruitment process. And I'd love to be able to say that we're in a situation that I can go to the University of Tennessee tomorrow and believe that the top 15-20% of graduates are going to be at the School of Education. I'm afraid I can't say that.
Okay. Well, with that, folks, we need to take a short commercial break, and we'll come back and go some more.
Hi, Grandma. It's Jake. I'm calling to tell you I love you more than anything in the whole wide world, even ice cream. I love you more than spaghetti and meatballs. I love you more than snakes and monkeys and sharks and whales and praying mantises. Bye, Grandma. Love you.
Let it all in with Charter Phone, including unlimited local and long-distance calls.
We're back, folks, and we're talking today with Dr. Dan Lawson, the Superintendent of Schools in Tullahoma. And the other thing that I would like to make sure that we cover, election time is coming up. We in Tullahoma, I don't know whether it's true of the other cities in the area, we have two people coming up for re-election on the Tullahoma School Board. I don't know whether the others in the area have the same kind of schedules or not, but and the election isn't until August, so it sounds like a long time away, but actually you're able to pick up the papers for filing in just a couple of weeks, and you have to make a decision and file by May the 16th, so that's not that far away, and so we should be paying attention to school board candidates. And it's been my content. I've spent a lot of time with you, a lot of time in the education area since I've been doing this show, and I've become convinced that the general voting public does not really appreciate the complexity of running a school system. And how do you feel about that? You think we have a sufficient understanding?
Yeah, let me answer that by first reinforcing the point that you made about timeliness of this dialogue. While we know the two positions that are up in Tullahoma, all this dialogue we can generalize to every community that's going to watch this.
Yes.
Because I can tell you without any question, without any compunction, that when I look at whether it's Lincoln County schools or Warren County schools or Tullahoma City schools or Coffee County schools, we are complex, multi-million-dollar enterprises employing folks who do everything from administer meds as registered nurses to provide speech therapy, occupational therapy, educational services. We cook meals, we clean buildings. In the city of Tullahoma, we employ nearly 500 people and are the single largest employer in this city. And I would suggest that as we look at each of the communities that have an opportunity to watch this, much the same is going to be in our sister communities. Simply put, boards of education are responsible to provide that oversight in terms of policy, that sense of direction, that sense of priority for the system. They are put in place to provide a voice and an interface between the community and the school system. And in the state of Tennessee, they're put in place to hire and fire a superintendent of schools just like me. So that's kind of the big picture of what they do, which sounds pretty simple. But in fact, the complexity is just tremendous, because when we think about the representation in all the communities, when we think about the federal dictates, standards, expectations in concert with state issues, and then we throw in local concerns, we've got competing interest for a very limited amount of assets. And school board membership is not something that you can walk into prepared to succeed without being prepared first to do a heck of a lot of homework, spend a lot of time investing both within the meetings and in preparation for the meetings, and to develop a great understanding as to how the 13,000 school systems in the United States work and what's important in our community to make school systems still vital and still critical for our existence.
And it's not, I think, generally appreciated that they have to go to school. You have an orientation and a course. They spend 2 or 3 days the first year.
Right.
That's mandatory, right?
In the state of Tennessee, statute mandates. There's not a lot of a mandate for the minimum requirements to become a school board member. To become a school board member, you gain a sufficient number of votes locally. You must have been a resident of the community that you're serving, and you must be perceived to be one who's of sufficient intelligence and moral standing to hold the position. So there's not a threshold, there's not a school, there's not some median standard that has to be met first. But in order to move along and to qualify for continuing as a school board member, you have a statutory mandate to go to school. You have a statutory mandate to learn some specific components that Tennessee School Boards Association has put together and provides in their training. And that training is provided for each of the 136 school boards in this state.
Yeah. And I think this is not something that one would approach on a casual basis. If you're going to try to be a member of the school board, you really need to be dedicated to that. It takes a fair amount of time to do it, and also there's a terrific learning curve involved there. I think, as we've discussed before, the first year is sort of groping your way around, trying to figure out kind of what's going on. And as I think you mentioned, it may be toward the end of the first term that you're actually very proficient. So anybody who's coming at that, ideally, should be prepared to devote a substantial number of years to it. I've thought at least 2 terms, 8 years. But I know back through the years, a couple of our most widely recognized members have served as long as 20 years on the board. So that's a whale of a commitment, and not something you do in connection with a half a dozen civic activities either.
It is. It truly is a major investment, and it's an investment that in our community is about community service. An awful lot of school board members in the state of Tennessee either volunteer their services or have such a small allowance that it certainly won't offset the phone bills that they may incur and some of the expenses they incur. In the city of Tullahoma, school board members are compensated to the tune of $100 a month. Now, that ranges in Tennessee from 0 up to about $21,000 a year. But just to give you an idea, we don't have anybody in this community who has a change in their tax bracket because of school board membership. Yeah. There's probably a change in their stress level and probably a change in sleep patterns, because it truly is important work that takes a great deal of investment. And while at times may not agree with some of our board members, I can never question and will never question their commitment to see great things happen in their community with our students. And those are areas in which we can grow. And I guess that's the other thing that I think is important to talk about. As you look at transitioning to a school board, there is a corporate value, a corporate decision that's been made, notwithstanding whatever individual opinions may be. And I think it's wonderful to have different individual decisions, ideas, inputs going in to make a stronger corporate decision as we leave. It's not bad to see divergent thoughts in boards. It's great to see divergent thoughts, but it's important to have those divergent thoughts merge and come together to form a great idea and a great consensus decision. I
was wondering how significant it is, or at least how desirable it is. You're going to have different issues, and we're going to run out of time. You're going to have different views about what ought to go on. Do those need to be worked through until you can come to some consensus? Is that ideal, or?
Yeah, I certainly think it is ideal, because I think it's real simple for us to forget the life and the expertise that folks bring to their school board as they walk in. I've got folks who have very different experiences and backgrounds and knowledges, and we need to incorporate those into great ideas to make us better. So as a school board member, I'm suggesting don't sit there and listen, be engaged, but understand that the focus is a corporate decision, not an individual one.
Okay. Well, folks, guess what? We've run out of time, as we always do. So let's take a short commercial break, and we'll have to wrap up.
Mark, you've won just about everything there is to win in racing. What's next?
I'd like more people to know about ER Extra.
The emergency room at Harton Regional Medical Center?
I just want them to get the best care they can get.
That just gets me right here, Mark.
Maybe you'd like to pay them a visit.
ER Extra at Harton Regional Medical Center.
ER Extra. Extra fast, extra easy, extra great.
Get your news first, fast, and free with your news leader on 6 every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights at 6, 8, and 10 p.m. Local weather, sports, community calendar events, and a comprehensive look at the latest news stories and news makers as only a video news broadcast can do. Get it first, fast, and free with News Leader on Channel 6, your local information network.
We're back, folks, and we've been talking today with Dr. Dan Lawson about some of the things of interest in the school systems. Dr. Lawson, there's one issue that I'd kind of like to get out on the table, and that is the necessity for a school board member to be open-minded and to have really one objective, and that's have the best system going, rather than going in looking for some particular issue. Do we? You want to comment on that, or do you think we have that occasionally?
I think that in my community, I have the luxury of having 7 people who are focused on an outcome. May have some differences as to how to get there, but very focused on the outcome and the expectation of seeing great things happen in the community for school purposes. I think what I would suggest folks do as they look at the possibility of becoming a candidate for a school board member is, just as you said, be singular in that expectation of greatness in a corporate environment, in a corporate enterprise, and bring your ideas to the table, knowing that the first idea thrown out is something that we ought to build on, not take ownership of and decide that we're going to leave with.
Well, when you say corporate, you're looking at the whole scheme of things, you know, not some single purpose. Well, with that, Dr. Dan, thank you very much for joining us again,
good to be here,
as always. And thank you, folks, for inviting us into your parlor. And please pay attention. We've got elections coming up, most important of which I think are school board members. So we'll see you again.